Hi, this is Rasmus Nielsen from RUNSAFE. This is a video about what is a running-related injury and how many runners sustain them. So the content of this video is to provide a brief overview of what is a running-related injury, what is the typical injury location, and how many sustain running-related injuries. This will be provided by providing the scientific overview of the current literature on this topic. So firstly, what is a running-related injury? Well, according to the literature, there has been a consensus-based definition published in the JUSPT by Yamato et al., saying that running-related training or competition musculoskeletal pain in the lower limbs that causes a restriction on or stoppage of running, distance, speed, duration, or training for at least 7 days or 3 consecutive scheduled training sessions, or that requires the runner to consult a physician or another healthcare professional. So even though this is a consensus-based definition and we at RUNSAFE have used this definition in several studies, we need to highlight that many other definitions exist. And in the Garmin-RUNSAFE running health study, we actually used another definition because we feel this dichotomized version of injury is not as appealing as it could be, because it really says runners either you are injured or you are not injured. So only 2 possibilities. But many runners are somewhere in between. So they are not injured, but they're not injury-free. So we needed a third option, and that's why we in the Garmin-RUNSAFE running health study used another definition. In the past week, have you had a musculoskeletal injury, or have you experienced a problem to muscles, tendons, or bones that is fully or partly caused by running? So here you will have 3 possibilities, either injury-free, uninjured, but with a problem, or you are injured. And we're looking very much forward to looking into these data to see how many of you actually sustained an running-related injury in the present study. So what about the typical injury location? Well, in other studies we have found that runners typically, not surprisingly, sustain injuries in the lower extremities. And here you see some typical injuries where we have the Achilles tendinopathy, we have the medial tibial stress syndrome, the runner's knee, which is ITB syndrome, the gluteal tendinopathy, we have the plantar fasciopathy, and also patellofemoral pain. These are very common injuries. In this study by Mulvad, it was on recreational runners. And if we look at other types of runners as well, we have made a study on novice runners. Again, same patterns. It's in the lower extremities, nearly the same type of diagnosis. And also runners that seek a sports club. This is in Canada, where we have, again, a majority of the injuries occurring in the lower extremities. So all these injuries, how many sustain them? Well, this is a good question. And in Denmark, we made a population-based study where we examined the injury prevalence proportion in the adult Danish population. As you can see in the table, we had nearly 3,500 respondents, and nearly 20% reported to having had a sports-related injury over the past year. What about running in relation to other types of sports? Because the nearly 20%, as you saw before, was across all types of sports. On the y-axis here you have the proportion of athletes in a certain sport reporting to having had at least 1 injury over a 1-year period. So in handball you see that 45% actually report to having had an injury related to handball in the past year. Soccer, 44%, and if we see running, around 21% of runners reporting to having had an injury in the past year. This may lead some to argue that handball and soccer injuries are more important, and it's more important to look at injuries in these type of sports than, for instance, in running. However, if we do not report injury as a percentage, but instead report it as a number, and use the same data as before, you will see this pattern, because we see many runners having injuries. So in the data collection we had from the Danish population, we saw that many Danes actually have a running-related injury. So why this difference? Because many people choose running as their preferred sport. So since many persons practice running, and the risk of injury in the population is around 20%, then we'll see a lot of injuries in running compared to other sports, at least in the Danish context. This may differ from across countries, because most likely there are other countries where running is less popular than in Denmark, and other sports are more popular. So, but if we take these numbers, it seems as running injuries is a considerable issue. Of course, this does not say something about the severity of injuries, because, for instance, in road cycling, the injury may be more severe than injuries sustained by runners. And then a huge question often raised in the media is, do high mileage runners sustain more injuries than other types of runners? Is it dangerous to be a high mileage runner? And if you look at a figure from one of my articles, this one, it's a huge table, and you shouldn't grasp all the numbers, but you see miles per week in the right hand side of the screen. And if we take this on this and condense it into something meaningful, it seems as there's an injury zone above 40 miles per week. So at least those studies comparing runners running more than 40 miles per week to runners that run less than 40 miles per week, it seems as if those running more are at increased risk compared to the others. This made some conclude that it's dangerous to be a high mileage runner. For instance, in this scientific article, in the conclusion, it says, in spite of numerous studies, strong evidence for prevention of running injury exists for only controlling training errors, primarily by limiting total running mileage. I cannot stress enough that this is not correct. Based on such studies, we cannot justify and say that it's because the high mileage runners run a lot that they sustain injury. This is a causal conclusion, and based on the available evidence today, that there's no justification in recommending high mileage runners to run less in order to prevent injuries. And we made this systematic review in 2015, where we compared injuries per 1,000 hours running. This is called an injury rate. And if we look at the injury rate on the y-axis and compare it between novice runners, recreational runners, and ultra-marathon runners, we can see that actually novice runners have a greater number of injuries per 1,000 hours of running compared to the other two groups. Here, the novice runner seems to be at highest risk of injury. So depending on how you analyze the data, you get different results. So if you compare the injury risk per 1,000 hours of running, it seems as if the group of novice runners are at greater risk. If we compare it by using the weekly mileage, we see that the high mileage runners are at increased risk. So, how to analyze these data? Well, there's a huge debate ongoing, and this is a recent article in the British Journal of Sports Medicine from 2020, where we discussed how to analyze injury data. And we used an example, for instance, on the Project Run 21 on half marathon runners, where we found an injury risk of 22%, over a 98-day period using a simple analytical approach, whereas the risk was 44% over the same period if data was analyzed using more advanced methods. So again, you can really get vastly different numbers depending on how you analyze the data, and I think this is one of the main messages based on the video here, that you get different results depending on which analyses that you conduct and which analytical approaches that you apply to your data. So mainly based on the presentation here, are running injuries a public health burden? Possibly it is. We can see that many runners sustain injury. We can see that we have many persons choosing running as their preferred type of sport, and consequently I think running injuries is an interesting topic to investigate in order to keep people exercising. But are we actually aware that people get sedentary if they sustain a running-related injury? Based on the available scientific evidence, I haven't seen any studies documenting that runners that sustain injury get sedentary. Possibly it can be that runners sustain injury start bicycling or swimming instead, so they are still being physically active. So we don't know, and if some of you are interested in doing science, I think this is a very important research question to investigate. If runners sustaining injuries become sedentary because they sustain injury. We don't know currently. So I hope it has been an interesting short introduction to what is a running-related injury, that you have as we showed, get an impression of where are they typically running injuries located, and also how many runners sustain running-related injuries. Thank you for watching.